Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, thanks. So hello everybody, welcome to the IUFRO Landscape Ecology Working Party webinar. It is the second webinar of this year, and today our topic is urban green infrastructure. My name is Pınar Pamukçu Albers and I'm the regional coordinator for Europe of this working party, and I will be hosting you today in this webinar. And basically, we are organizing this webinar series to deal with measure current and future topics related to the landscape ecology and related research communities. So today we have four successful landscape ecologists as speakers, and I will introduce them to you and start to ask questions to them under the content of the webinar. But first of all, I would like to explain what IUFRO is and what actually we are doing as a working party. So IUFRO stands for International Union of Forest Research Organization, and it's a global, non-profit, non-governmental, and non-discriminatory scientific organization, and it's based in Vienna, Austria. And basically, it advances research excellence and knowledge sharing and fosters development of science-based solutions to forest-related challenges for the benefit of forests and also people as well worldwide. And there are some research themes under the or within the IUFRO's global network, like forests for people, forests and climate change, and so on. You can see all others on the webpage of IUFRO, and they are all aiming to guide the science collaboration within this global network. And I would also like to share the structure overview or structure of IUFRO. We can see on the top International Council, and all countries with IUFRO members are represented here on this council. And we can see the board just above the below the council, and it is executive organ of IUFRO. And under it, we can see headquarters, which includes divisions, research groups, working groups like ours, task forces, and special projects, programs, and initiatives. So I said divisions. There are 9 permanent divisions in IUFRO, and basically I would like to explain a little bit about our working party and divisions. So our working party, landscape ecology, and it is under the unit of forest ecosystem functions. And this unit 8.01 is under the division 8, which is forest environment. So if you check check the webpage of IUFRO, you can find other 8 permanent divisions, and they are all covering key forest research fields. So like silviculture or forest products or social aspects of forests and so on. So, and our coordinator is Joe Azevedo from Portugal. Our deputies are Pele Fan from the United States and Jose Gobi from Argentina. So actually, before talking about our regional coordinators of our working party, I would like to thank to our working party coordinator of our working party coordinator, Joe Azevedo. Just as he had me prepare for this webinar, he's now doing all the technical stuff in the background. So thank you so much, Joe. And for the regional coordinator, as I mentioned, I'm responsible for Europe, and Keming Ma is a regional coordinator for China. Dolores Armenteres is a regional coordinator for Latin America. Toshia Matsura is responsible for Japan and Oceania. Pele Fan is for North America, and Syed Ajur Rahman is for South and Southeast Asia. So we have also two thematic coordinators. Dolores Armenteres is a thematic coordinator for IALE and IUFRO, and Giovanni Sanesi is a thematic coordinator for urban forestry. So, for our working party actually was created in 1991, and the aim was to find out, to bridge the gap landscape ecology and also its implementation, its application into the management forest systems. So, and basically we are organizing many events, many congresses, conferences, symposium, promoting events as well, and we are publishing also. So, and our latest meeting was in Curitiba last year in Brazil during World Congress, IUFRO World Congress, and hopefully our next meeting will be in 2021, which is next year. So either virtual and physical, we are still discussing about that, and or we have to postpone it to 2022. We will see. We are still discussing, as I said, and whenever we really decide about the venue and the date, we will also announce it on our webpage. So now we can start our webinar. Welcome one more time, and I want to introduce our first speaker, Jingle Wu. He's a Dean's Distinguished Professor of Sustainability Science in the School of Life Sciences and the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. He is working on landscape ecology, urban ecology, ecological modeling, and sustainability science. So good morning, Jingle. I'm saying good morning because I know it is very early in Tempe.
Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. Just for warming up and just for my own curiosity, I would like to ask a very short question first, just 1 minute answer question, basically. Which green areas are you visiting nowadays in your city?
Which kinds of green areas?
Yeah, green areas.
Parks, yeah.
Parks.
Parks, yeah, mostly parks.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Just I wanted to ask, that's also just for warming up. And our speaker is my friend, Francesca Ugolini. She's a researcher at the Institute of Bioeconomy at the Italian National Research Council, and she's working on plant physiology, plant responses under water stress, impacts of climate change in terrestrial ecosystem and agriculture, environmental education, ICT in education, and educational methodologies. So good afternoon, Francesca.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for being here with us, even though you have a very busy schedule for your project deadline. And after the training school in 2015, it is good to see you here as well.
That's great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks a lot to you as well. And I would like to ask the same question, actually. What kind of green areas are you visiting nowadays in your city during pandemic?
Well, actually, nowadays we are in a lockdown, so we cannot visit any. No, actually, it is allowed to visit green areas, and I have a small park near my house, so I haven't gone there yet, but I will surely go, maybe after the meeting.
Yeah, okay, that's good. I'm also thinking about that. Yeah, I would like to introduce our third speaker, Daniele La Rosa. He is an associated professor of urban and environmental planning at the University of Catania, Italy. He is working on sustainable planning, ecosystem services, GIS applications for urban and landscape planning, environmental indicators, environmental strategic assessment, land use science, and landscape studies. So, good afternoon, Daniele.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Pinar. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for you for being with us. And again, same question to you. What kind of green areas are you going to nowadays in your city?
Thanks again. My pleasure to be here. Well, yeah, normally people living in cities used to go to public urban green spaces.
Yeah.
And people nowadays, the situation in Italy is quite scattered because there are some regions which have to adhere to more strict lockdown, and other that are a bit for other regions, people are more free to move around and walk around. So at the moment in my region, we are in a semi lockdown. So
okay.
we are, as Francesca said, we are free to move around, and even if we cannot stand together with other people.
Yeah.
So that's the current situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce our fourth speaker for today, Simona Gredinaro. And she's a postdoc at the Landscape Dynamics Research Unit at the University of Bucharest, Romania. She is working on analysis of urban sprawl and associated processes, agricultural land abandonment due to urbanization, evaluation of spatial planning outcomes, urban green infrastructure, and mapping historic and present landscape patterns. So, good afternoon, Simona. Thank you so much for being with us here.
Good afternoon and hello to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Yeah, thanks a lot to you as well. And I will ask the same question also to you. What kind of green areas are you visiting nowadays?
Nowadays, I took advantage of the autumn colors and visited the botanical garden.
Okay.
Bucharest. It's nearby university. So we are also in Romania facing some restrictions, but we are still allowed to move freely, at least until 11 p.m. So I think a lot of people, not just myself, take advantage of any green they have nearby to spend some time in nature.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. And I would like to explain before the discussion first what we are talking about today, or what we are gonna talk about it. So actually we can define green infrastructure, urban green infrastructure. Maybe even there is no one size fits all definition, but we can define it. But I would like to explain, or I would like to say that green infrastructure in urban areas can be applied or used, for example, as a strategy of climate change mitigations, or as a part of nature-based solutions, or as a cost-effective management strategy, for example, to reduce urban heat islands, or even as a way to promote the cooling island effect, as a tool to face the global challenges of climate change, urbanization, and nowadays, particularly pandemic, even we can tell, and even we can use as an approach, integrated approach for sustainable and resilient cities. And even sometimes as a means, we can use this green infrastructure concept as a means of developing for the cities. So, and we are landscape ecologists, and actually we are really playing an important role, whether it is determining climate change strategies, or implementing nature-based solutions, or any other proposals of applying or using green spaces, green infrastructure in the urban area. So, which is good, we are very lucky. But at the same time, we are working with the people who are benefiting from these green areas, and we are working with the people who are making decisions to ensure sustainability of this human nature nexus, let's say. So today we would like to discuss first how can urban green infrastructure contribute to the urban resilience, and climate change pandemic as well. And second question is for us, how can landscape ecologists enable green infrastructure to play a more active role in terms of strategic planning in avoiding and responding to pandemics and climate change? So I talk so much because I'm talking so much as a Turkish person. Now I would like to start with a basic question to Jingle, but it is maybe the most important one I'm gonna ask today, because I believe that the answer to this question will also be good for those watching us and want to understand a little bit more what the relationship between urban green infrastructure and resilience, urban resilience is. So Jingle, what is the role of green infrastructure in cities that are resistant to pandemic and climate change? In other words, what is the link between urban green infrastructure and urban resilience?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. This is a fascinating topic. And of course, this is a $1 million question. I'm not sure I have all the answers, but I think everybody agree that the urban green infrastructure is very important for mitigating and adapting to climate change, and also for the pandemic, coping with the pandemic. And in general, I think we all understand that the urban green infrastructure, which is, I think, defined very broadly, including urban forestry and artificial green spaces, and including golf courses and all sorts of things. I remember we had a urban forestry conference back in 2002 in Shanghai. About 40 people from around the world attended it. And then urban forestry was defined as green spaces of all kinds, including trees, shrubs, and grasses, and all sorts of things. Therefore, I think three kinds of ecosystem services are very important, essential from urban green spaces or urban green infrastructure. The provisioning, regulating, and cultural services are very important. And many studies have shown in the past 20, 30 years that urban green space is also essential for physical, psychological well-being of residents in the cities. So in terms of urban resistance and urban resilience, I think they are two different but related concepts. And I think urban green spaces for most cities around the world and provide, I think, a very essential element for the cities that have to be resilient. Resistance, on the other hand, I think is something also important. But I think urban resilience is the primary function, that the goal we are, I think, aiming at in terms of maintaining and improving urban green infrastructure. I think many people here, I can see quite a few familiar names who have done wonderful research around the world on urban resilience and urban ecosystem services. I think I should stop here.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Essential element, you said urban resilience as primary function is very important for the role of green infrastructure and urban resilience. And my second question is for Simona, and I would like to continue with the topic relationships between urban green infrastructure and urban resilience as well. And Simona, how can strategic spatial planning contribute to the relationships between urban green infrastructure and urban resilience?
Thanks, Pinal. I think before answering the question, it would be interesting to explain a bit more what strategic spatial planning is, particularly for people that are not very familiar with type of planning. So strategic spatial planning is a future-oriented type of planning. It is about visions. It is about how the way a city can transform, and the way multiple actors, public, private, can sit together at the same table to build this vision for their city. And I think urban green infrastructure is a big part of many strategic spatial plans of, especially in Europe. Because green infrastructure, it is I would say an integrative concept. It has close ties with many environmental and social themes. It can also have a very important contribution to resilience. Although I must say from my experience, resilience is not always part of strategic planning, or is not always the explicit aim of strategic spatial planning. Urban green infrastructure can create this link between the actors and resilience, as Jingo said, for example, through helping with climate adaptation and mitigation of climate change effects.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simona. And my next question about the relationship this time between COVID-19 and urban green infrastructure. And it is for Francesca. And contagious diseases like COVID-19 affect people and seriously disrupt our everyday activities, especially outdoor activities, like you said, and Daniela also mentioned the situation in Italy. So you and your colleagues recently published a paper, and I recently read it. It is very good paper, I would say. Can you please explain us how people's attitudes change towards green areas, including urban forests, of course, during the COVID-19 quarantine?
I should unmute first myself. So thank you for the question. Yes, the study was very interesting, and it has been recently published in the journal Urban Forest and Urban Greening. So maybe I should make a short premise about how, let's say, the idea came from. If you remember, I mean, Italy was the first country in Europe hit by the COVID-19 pandemic in March, and the government started, I mean, a series of an escalation actually of restrictions and regulation to avoid the virus spreading. So the sense of freedom deprivation and the social isolation stimulated in us a question about what was the usage before and the usage during the pandemic of green areas by citizens, and how, let's say, the citizens also perceived the relationship between the urbanization, the urban environment, and nature. So we started, I mean, the survey in March in Italy, but then in a very nice and empathic way, it was spread out in some countries in Europe, and I'm really thankful for other colleagues for instance, from Croatia, Spain, Israel, Lithuania, Slovenia, and Chile. So you can find all the results, I mean, of the survey in the paper, and I can maybe send you the link in the chat after this talk. So we collected a lot of data, actually, more than 2,500 responses. And most of these people actually are users, are visitors of urban green spaces quite frequently. This was before, I mean, at least what they say before the pandemic. And during the quarantine, obviously, there were some changes, some behavioral changes, because of the restrictions first, like in Italy and Spain, most of the respondents couldn't actually go out, so they couldn't visit any green space, while in other countries they kept doing it. And but it's also interesting how, let's say, let's say the people that we didn't consider like frequent users of green spaces during the quarantine actually started visiting it. And maybe it was because, I mean, it was a way, let's say, to go out and to enjoy, let's say, the freedom. And in general, there was a tendency to visit green spaces at closer distances. Again, mainly in the countries where there was also a limitation of movement, which was allowed only within a few hundred meters from home. And the urban parks were the most preferred type of green areas. Although to a lesser extent than before. In fact, in some countries, there was an increase of visitors walking along tree-lined streets. And in other countries, like in Slovenia and Lithuania, for instance, there was a relative increase of people traveling to green areas outside the town. And for which motivation? I mean, what pushed people to visit green spaces even before the pandemic was to have a physical exercise, which means walking and running and relaxing. And during the pandemic, there was also a change in a behavioral change in these terms. In fact, some of the activities that cannot be considered essentials, like meeting people or observing nature, which was done before, were mostly reduced, especially in the countries where the restrictions were more stronger, let's say. While other activities like dog walkers, I mean, taking dog out or even taking the kids to green spaces were selected. And this last option was particularly selected by Croatians, for instance. And another, let's say, aspect that we wanted to investigate is the perception, I mean, and especially the missing value of urban green spaces. And we made an hypothesis that by which, let's say, we wanted to find a kind of relationship between the type of green space that people could see from the window and the perception of deprivation. And honestly, we didn't find such a good relationship, but it's very important maybe to feel less, let's say, deprivation, or to feel less the missing, I mean, of the green space. Having a natural landscape or a wide view from the window can help a lot. So, let's say a suggestion could be, let's say, having not, let's say, reduce the density, the compaction of the urban fabric. And but obviously, what the aspect, let's say, the relationship between the missing feeling was strongly related to the frequency of the visitation. So people who could not go out, like in Spain and Italy, were actually those who missed the urban green spaces a lot. While in Slovenia, for instance, or in Lithuania, where people could travel by car or by bike and could actually go out and enjoy the nature, they didn't feel any missing. I mean, they didn't miss urban green spaces at all. So another aspect is we investigated is what actually the people miss. And just spending time outdoors was one of the most, one of the most selected options, and also meeting other people. So again, I mean, the nature and urban green spaces can help, let's say, in the feeling of well-being and in the social aspects. And then finally, at the question about the relationships between urbanization and nature, we made a thematic analysis and we identified 39 concepts, which can be grouped in macro categories, let's say. And again, here the citizens gave good suggestions, tangible recommendations, especially in the field of governance. And in fact, there was the need, the expressing need of people to increase the quantity of green surfaces in the urban fabric. And it's very important for them to have green spaces and trees in the new neighborhoods, especially. So reducing paving and buildings, increasing the green surfaces, increasing the number of trees were concepts, were really important things for the citizens. Regarding the existing green areas, aspects related to the maintenance and management are also very important, like thinking about cleaning up or securing, or making the places more secure, and even looking at aspects related to the quality of management. So we can surely say that the respondents were really aware, about the importance of green areas, and they really expressed also the need to educate adults and children to take care for the environment. So let's say that to conclude, the results showed surely behavioral change to the restrictions, and also expressed, respondents expressed the need for urban greenery and urban planning that integrates more green spaces of different sizes, but close and accessible. That's all.
Yeah, Francesca, thank you for detailed and very informative answer. And I believe that your paper also was very valuable and was very nice, was very good for this term during this pandemic. My next question is for Simona. And after the emergence of COVID-19, green areas and green infrastructure came into the forefront of city plans and strategic goals, like having a 15 minutes walking distance to these areas, for example, especially in some European cities. And you can find even about that good publication. And even right now, we are talking about this walking distance in Istanbul. I'm saying even in Istanbul, because if you know about little bit Istanbul, you know also how much the city is dense and how many people are living here, more than 15 people. So anyway, so it is good to keep it forefront of the city plans. And you are working also strategic spatial planning and also policy in terms of planning. What do you think about the effectiveness of COVID-19 measures in the city plans or in the city scale, let's say, in relation to strategic plan of urban regions or national policies? I mean, is it possible to carry the idea from city plans further to urban regions or to national policies? What do we need to extend it? And if your answer is yes, I mean, yes, we can carry the idea further to a little bit bigger scale, let's say. Then which principles of green infrastructure planning are followed in the plans? And if no, if you can, you say, oh no, we cannot take the idea further, then what is the limitation for that?
I will try to take it step by step. I mean, in respect to what you said, the relationship between what strategic plans aimed at and what were the COVID measures aiming at, I would say, at least in the initial stages, they were contradicting each other, as Francesca mentioned before. In many countries, people were not allowed to go outside. They maybe were allowed to take their pets out, the dogs out, and have short walks just in the neighborhood, but not allowed to visit big parks. So I would say in the initial stage of the pandemic, there was basically no count of what strategic planning aimed at, because everyone was focusing on dealing with the COVID-19 situations. But from my experience and from what I've read recently, more and more cities realize the importance of having nearby recreation spaces, of having a place to go just for a walk, to have contacts with nature. And it was not just the researchers, but also the local governments that realized how valuable, I would say extremely valuable, these green areas are in the context of traveling restrictions. And maybe what I would add here is that looking back, we should learn something. There are some lessons to be learned. First, it's what I mentioned before about the nearby recreation, the importance of it. Pinar, you mentioned Istanbul, that is a dense city. There are many other dense cities in around the world that need these nearby recreation areas, be it a small pocket park in the neighborhood, some trees that people can look out from their window. And I think in the future, strategic planning will pick up this in setting visions. Anyhow, strategic planning already focused on developing urban green infrastructures, but I think now it will become even more important. What I would say, it also showed to us this entire period is how important green areas are for vulnerable groups, for elderly people, and for children. Sometimes they cannot travel as much as other people. And Francesca, I really liked her example where she said that people that had the opportunity to go outside the city didn't really miss urban green areas, urban parks, but people that were stuck in the city, they really missed this connection with nature. And I think a big part of those people that remain in the city are elderly people and young people, children in particular. So I think for the future, it would be really important to make urban green areas inclusive and to provide facilities within the urban green spaces that will make them more accessible for these vulnerable groups. And in terms of effectiveness, I would say, of COVID measures and also strategic plans, another thing that I expect to become more and more important is the way urban green infrastructure will be linked to urban agriculture and food security, because the entire situation showed us the importance of having short distribution chains for food, showed us how important food security is. And if we expand a bit and from the city scale to the urban region level, I expect agricultural areas to be included in within urban green infrastructures. Farming will provide not just food, but also opportunities for recreation, and could also have a social function. You asked which principles of green infrastructure are followed in plans. In the study that I conducted together with my former colleague Anna Herzberger at WSL in Switzerland, we looked at various cities in Europe and their strategic plans, and we tried to understand which planning principles they follow and what is their general approach. And what we found was that surprisingly, to some maybe, cities have different ways of planning green infrastructure. It's not the same everywhere. Some focus on more on the cultural side, some focus on the physical and biodiversity side. And but despite these differences, I would say the most popular planning principles are multifunctionality and connectivity of green infrastructure. Well, if they are also very much connected to landscape ecology, I would say this is one of the topics where we could strengthen our contribution. And in terms of what is missing, I would say that a stronger coordination with other planning domains. We are here today to discuss about resilience and climate change. And I think connecting the way green infrastructures are planned with these themes, with resilience and climate change, could be a way to answer the current challenges, environmental challenges. And of course, linked to what I said before, making the green infrastructures more inclusive, having inclusiveness as a planning principle would be something to aim for. I hope I answered all the questions.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Simona. It was very, very good and very informative answer as well. And actually, Daniele, you waited so long. Sorry for that, but your
That's
questions are last part of the webinar. That's why. And my next question is for you. So while we are talking about urban green infrastructure, we are also talking about its ecosystem services like climate regulation, biodiversity protection, as Simona mentioned, improve water quality and flood prevention, as well as connectivity, green economy, and green, gray, blue integration. Yet, we also know about factors limiting the implementation of green infrastructure in cities, such as, for example, cost overrun or space availability or other priorities or bare necessities of municipality, let's say. So my question is, what are the factors that facilitate the implementation of green infrastructure in cities in terms of, strategy or policy or governance or something to avoid cost overrun we can do?
Yeah, thanks, Pina, for the question. I will try to list some of these factors that I went through our own experience as planners or as scientists in such a topic of urban green infrastructure. First of all, I think that the most important, but sorry for being a bit pragmatic, as always I am, is that when we are talking of planning some public spaces, as the urban green infrastructure actually is, we need to face the availability of the land that could be used for urban green infrastructure. So especially in dense cities, as many of the cities, for example, of South Europe, we don't have too much space where to work on. And so we have some, and the majority, most of these spaces, most of these areas are private. So a very crucial point for from the public authorities, for the municipalities, for other public authorities who are in charge of planning the urban green infrastructure, is to acquire these areas. So to take these areas from private properties and transform to public properties. And this is a very a bottleneck in many planning processes, because municipality often do not have sufficient economic resources to acquire these lands, these areas. And so we have to find some other mechanisms, some economic or financial incentives to offer to private owners of these lands, or we have to find some other hybrid ways to try to get these areas. So I will not go into details because we don't have the time, but this is very, in my opinion, crucial point that require more and more research and applied research, I would say. And then another important thing is that any policy, any plan for urban green infrastructure should be framed in a policy framework, or in a planning framework that will be able to integrate this new project for the cities in a more broad normative framework. So, for example, if I'm talking, of course, for the Italy example, in Italy we have 20 regions and we have 20 different planning norms, one for each region. And this means that not in every region there is a room for green infrastructure to be planned as a green infrastructure, for example. So we are planning green areas, we are planning public open spaces, and maybe the same concept is handled in different ways by the different regions in charge of planning. So we also have to we need some innovation in planning framework, in planning normative, in order that the green infrastructure could find a proper place within this framework. And finally, another important factor that was very well introduced by Francesca is the trying to find the preference of people using this green infrastructure. One thing that I found in some recent work that we did in our research group, and which is very similar to what Francesca said and others research are saying, is that people maybe could accept what they already have in terms of amount of space, amount of areas for their open spaces, for their parks, available park at 15 or 20, I don't know, minutes walking, but they are very much asking for a well-managed areas. So they need for clean places where to bring their children, safe places for where to work or run. So in many instances, the management of these areas, it could be even more important than the management of existing green areas could be even more important than finding other and new areas within the city boundaries. And then, of course, related to this point is what you Pinar suggested in your question, the need to avoid to face too much cost in the management. So in this case, of course, every project, every attempt to plan some new green area should consider the actual cost of management. This is another very important point, and I know some important research is currently conducted on this. So absolutely, even in the choice of the design, on the configuration of the green spaces, it's important to foresee how much work I will need to put in that area for the management of the area itself. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. It seems we know how to facilitate the implementation of green infrastructure. But first of all, we need to have green spaces in dense cities, as you said, and there's no place, let's say, to create strategic green infrastructure. However, unfortunately, particularly in developing countries, green areas are generally not planned or not built to create a system like a green-blue infrastructure system, let's say. So my question is for Jingle. Jingle, where are the potential opportunities in terms of non-urbanized areas for greening in cities? How can, at the same time, how can urban green infrastructure provide multifunctional and sustainable green, gray, blue interaction as well? And because we need biodiversity, we need water in cities. We don't want to lose water, and we need enough water as well. And we need also soil. Need to have soil and conserve the soil. So what do you think about multifunctionality of green infrastructure?
Thank you. I think multifunctionality of landscapes in general is extremely important for sustainability and resilience. Let me just clarify a few concepts, words I use here. I think resilience is part of sustainability, not vice versa. Urban area or city that is resilient is not necessarily sustainable, but a sustainable city or sustainable area must be resilient. I think that's the first thing I want to clarify. I know colleagues use the term very differently. Second, I think I really applaud and I agree that urban design, urban planning must be multiple scale, and diversity, heterogeneity, accessibility are all equally important. I think we have seen that empirically from this pandemic. Thirdly, I think we need to be clear what we are talking about here, urban resilience. What is urban resilience? Many people have defined very differently. The most common definition I have found when I was writing a paper back in 2013 on urban resilience, the most common definition I found was the ability for a city to bounce back or recover from a disaster. Usually people use time to measure how fast. I think that's too narrow. It's not a proper definition for urban resilience in general. I think most of us believe that urban resilience refers to the total capacity of a city to maintain and the basic fundamental structure and functionality in the face of disturbances and uncertainties. I think that would be a more comprehensive definition, which is in line with Buzz Holly's ecological resilience definition. To answer your question here, I think in order for urban green infrastructure to be useful, to be effective for urban resilience, again, we need to think about it on multiple scales. If you do that, then not just the urban green spaces within the city, are important, but also the hinterlands, the natural areas outside the cities are also important. I think I would highly recommend, advocate Richard Foreman's perspective on urban sustainability, although he does not like the term urban sustainability very much. But well, he used to say it, and we I remember I worked with him on the paper and for nature, the nature paper a few years ago, and he emphasized that, and I fully agreed, and we have to think about sustainability resilience globally, but we have to plan regionally and act locally. Although sounds like a slogan. I think we need to plan our cities, urban areas, urban regions, and landscape regional scales. It's really important, meaning that urban green spaces of all kinds, urban blue spaces, small, large, diversity of urban green spaces within and outside cities have to play a role simultaneously in order to mitigate, adapt to climate change, and cope with the pandemic and other uncertainties. And I have to emphasize, especially in the context of what's going on in the United States, diversity, accessibility, equity of urban green infrastructure must be emphasized, especially for not just for developing countries. Think about the United States. It's said to be the greatest country in the world. Americans like to claim that's the case, but we have evidenced a lot of ugly things that have happened during this very special time. I think urban planners, urban designers can help, at least uh, in terms of urban resilience, urban sustainability, release anxiety of people, especially people living in the cities. I certainly think urban landscape ecology, urban planning can work together, contribute greatly to the future of human well-being and the sustainability of our cities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jingle. We don't have so much time, but still I have two more questions. And this next question is for Daniele. Green areas that were strategically created as green infrastructure are not only protecting themselves in terms of biodiversity or soil or water, whatever you can think, but also being protected by people, because people want to go and protect and to have it there in their cities basically. However, we need to have suitable and sustainable management of these areas due to the increment of population and also their demands. So my question is about strategy. So basically for suitable and sustainable management of green spaces and green infrastructure, we need a strategy. So how can we incorporate a green infrastructure into a strategy? Thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks, Pinar. I think this question is related to one of the factor that I was mentioning in my previous answer to the previous question, which is was linked to the need of an innovation in planning and policy framework at different probably administrative level. This is also related to what Jingle said before. We need some multi-scale approach to planning and of course also management of urban green infrastructure. This means that we need some normative framework that allow us to do this. So we need a connection between different layers of policy and planning. That should be, of course, all connected each other. And also at the, I would say that at the very low scale, probably the lowest scale we can think of is the one that is addressed by urban spatial plan. So the spatial plan that every municipality, for example, should implement. Maybe at this low level of planning, we need some binding reference to be a bit more effective in terms of implementation and management of green infrastructure. So some binding reference in terms of quantity and quality of services that these areas could be able to provide. In terms, and this quantity and quality of services, of course, could be measured by different types of proxy on variables or of indicators. Ecosystem services are one of these approach that we can use to provide this binding reference for spatial planning. But and finally, I wanted to add a very quick comment on the question. I think that you asked how we can incorporate green infrastructure into a strategy, but I would also say how we can downscale green infrastructure from a strategy to a more physical and tangible feature of our city. So this needed integration between planning levels, policy level, framework of different norms and regulation are very, very, very important.
Thank you so much, Daniele. And my last question is for Francesca. And can you tell us which stakeholders play a role in terms of application or implementation of urban green infrastructure? I think it is correct to accept all people living in cities, citizens, as stakeholders. How can we get these stakeholders at the same table with the decision makers? I mean, not of course physically, maybe the representatives of some groups of the citizens, but mentally, in case similar or supportive ideas.
Thank you, Pinar, for this question. I think, let's say, even to answer the question, my colleagues, I mean, Yango, Daniele, and Simona, they gave also some keywords, I mean, to answer this question. They mentioned the sustainability. They mentioned also listening, I mean, to the citizens' needs. I mean, that policymakers actually should listen to the citizens. And so there are different levels and different scales that we should probably consider for the next years and for the next year, for the future, let's say, urban planning. We should, let's say, consider the urban green infrastructure as a complex system, which is constantly threatened by external factors. And as a complex system, I think that a variety of stakeholders should actually meet together, considering different expertise, different interests, also because as we know, the green infrastructure has such influence also on other environmental policies, like for instance, water management, air quality, soil protection. So at, let's say, the policy level, there should be an open door, let's say, to other departments, to other sectors, let's say. And but also, as Yango was considering, is that we should consider that the global population is growing, and the people living in urban areas will be probably continue growing. So it's crucial to have a sustainable city and sustainable cities, which are able, let's say, to mitigate and adapt to climate change, but also, I mean, cities where equity, equality, for instance, the respect for health system, for education, are respected and guaranteed to all citizens. And in a way, I think that the green infrastructure can play a role in this. As we know, I mean, the green infrastructure is very important to, I mean, to create a social, even a social community, a social system, and increase, I mean, the health and well-being in citizens. And most of all, I think that we should foster also the sense of community in every neighborhood and in every town, meaning that the people should feel probably the green area as a part of its house, and having also the love for it and caring for it. So rather than a top-down approach, which has been probably adopted until now, a bottom-up approach should be the future for the next urban planning. And there are examples. I mean, I'm not a landscape architect. I'm not a urban planner. But in these days, I mean, even to answer this question, I was searching for information, and we actually worked in a project which is related. In the last 6 years, so in Europe at least, more than 6,000 millions of funds, of public funds, have been spent for green infrastructure. A little part of it, I mean, not all, because most of it was probably devoted to conservation projects, I mean, for nature protection, because the green infrastructure is a big concept. But part of it was actually spent in projects which regard the urban green infrastructure. And there are examples, like in Turin, in Hamburg, in Dublin, not only Europe, but also elsewhere, like in Johannesburg. But in the web, I mean, maybe we can find even more examples in which the local communities are actually involved in the process of urban planning. And so for instance, the concept of co-planning, of co-design, are achieving an increase in interest, an increase in attention, which means involving different stakeholders, like local organizations, groups of citizens, NGOs, for instance. And I think it's extremely important, not only for planning, I mean, and for managing, because they can provide also assistance and maintenance work or labor, let's say, but they can actually build up the sense of belonging that I was telling before. And so the way, let's say, all these groups can actually interact, they can be focus groups, debating groups, like in presence, or maybe nowadays much better with web platforms. But there are also apps that allow, at a wider scale than a neighborhood level, let's say, to allow citizens at least to interact and to tell what they really need, and to interact with other stakeholders, like the policymakers, I mean, on the two sides. So all these should actually raise even the cultural values of the green areas for the citizens, and would help even to maybe empower the citizens in increasing their satisfaction also for taking care or for actually contributing to planning or to the maintenance of green spaces. The other stakeholders that I shouldn't avoid are academicians and experts, like consultants, because they would bring innovation and new solutions, even to maximize the benefits of the green infrastructure and the provision of the services. So there are even other examples. I mean, like a citizen science project can be good tools even to raise the competencies of the citizens and the knowledge regarding certain aspects related to nature. And what else? I mean, other kinds of activities and projects that put together communities are initiatives like Adopt a Green Space, in which in the private actually part, the private organization can take advantage, I mean, of this kind of call by public administrations and provide maintenance, planning, and management of certain public spaces. So, or even thinking about the community gardens. So all these are kind of tools and opportunities for increasing, let's say, the connectivity between different stakeholders. So what I would suggest, sorry.
But our time is very limited. So can you wrap up just with 1-2 sentences, please?
Yeah, so just to conclude, I mean, what is important, I think, is a cooperation and the multidisciplinarity, and also finding, I mean, a common language, which means understanding what are the needs, what are the needs of the citizens, which are the tools and the objective, well, the objective first, and the tools to achieve these objectives. All together, I mean, sitting at the same table, basically.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Francesca. Actually, there is one question, but I believe that we can contact the person via email. So I don't want, but I have to finish this webinar thanking all our speakers for their wisdom and being and participating in this webinar. And I noticed we were more or less 70 people during the live stream in this webinar. And thank you also to the audience who attended this webinar, and hopefully it was useful for you, and that you could take messages home as well. Follow us on our webpage and subscribe to the mailing list to receive from us news or updates or on our events and initiatives and so on. So thanks again to all. Stay safe and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very much
for the opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you all.